In the 6th century BCE, China was in turmoil. The once stable Zhou Dynasty had fragmented into a patchwork of rival states, each vying for power through war and deception. Rituals that once bound communities had lost their meaning. Authority no longer commanded respect, and people no longer trusted their leaders. It was a time of political collapse and moral confusion. Into this fractured world was born a man named Confucius, better known to history as Confucius. He was not a ruler or a general, nor did he seek to be one. Instead, he became a teacher, a thinker, and a moral reformer. Confucius believed that the chaos around him was not just a political problem, but a failure of character. Society, he argued, could not be repaired by laws alone. It needed a renewal of virtue. Confucius taught that order must begin with the individual, with cultivating one's sense of justice, compassion, and responsibility. His vision was rooted in the wisdom of the past, but it was anything but nostalgic. He didn't idealize old rituals for their own sake. He believed they could still teach people how to live with dignity and respect if approached with sincerity. Though Confucius attracted a small group of dedicated followers, he never held high office. In fact, his political advice was often ignored by the rulers of his day, but his ideas endured. After his death, his students compiled his conversations and teachings into a collection known as the Analects. Over time, these teachings became the foundation of one of the most influential ethical and political traditions in human history, guiding emperors, shaping institutions, and helping entire civilizations think about what it means to live well and govern wisely. Confucius believed that the strength of a society begins not with its laws, but with the moral fiber of its leaders. In a time when rulers often relied on force, punishment, or manipulation to maintain control, Confucius offered a radically different idea, that a ruler's true power comes from virtue. For Confucius, good governance wasn't about enforcing obedience through fear. It was about inspiring trust through moral example. A leader who acts with integrity, humility, and fairness sets the tone for the entire state. People, he argued, are more likely to follow someone they respect than someone they fear. Just as a North Star guides the movement of ships without moving itself, so too should a virtuous ruler guide the people without needing to compel them. He warned that ruling through threats and punishments might secure short-term compliance, but it breeds resentment and instability. By contrast, ethical leadership creates a society where people internalize values and choose to do what is right, not because they're afraid of being caught, but because they recognize its worth. This Confucian model of leadership, governing by moral example, challenges modern assumptions that effective power must be centralized, procedural, or technocratic. It asks a more fundamental question: what kind of person should lead, and how should leadership shape the moral culture of a society? In this way, Confucius redefines political authority not as domination, but as moral influence. A ruler's legitimacy flows from character, and the health of a society depends on the ethical cultivation of both leaders and citizens. At the center of Confucian ethics is a single, radiant ideal, Ren, often translated as humaneness or benevolence. Ren is the virtue that binds all others together. It's the deep, felt sense of empathy, the capacity to see others not as tools or threats, but as fellow human beings worthy of care and respect. For Confucius, Ren isn't an abstract principle reserved for philosophers. It begins in the everyday, how we speak to our parents, how we treat a neighbor in need, how we respond to someone who wrongs us. It means putting ourselves in another's shoes and acting from that shared humanity. Confucius believed that the cultivation of Ren starts in the family, where roles are intimate and moral habits are formed. But it doesn't end there. True humaneness extends outward to strangers, to those in distant lands, even to political enemies. A person who embodies Ren acts with compassion, not because it is strategic, but because it is right. This virtue wasn't just personal, it was political. A ruler who lacks Ren, Confucius warned, may wield power but cannot inspire loyalty. A leader who possesses it, on the other hand, becomes a source of moral gravity. People follow them not out of fear, but out of trust and admiration. To practice Ren is to be constantly aware of the humanity in others and to respond with kindness, understanding, and humility. In a world still marked by division and cruelty, Confucius's call for Ren remains a powerful reminder that ethical life begins not in rules or doctrines, but in how we treat each other. To Confucius, moral character isn't just something we think about, it's something we practice, and the way we practice it is through li, ritual. In the modern world, we often think of rituals as stiff, outdated ceremonies. But in Confucian thought, li is far more dynamic. It encompasses everything from formal rites honoring ancestors to the way we greet a friend, serve a meal, or behave in public. Li is about form, but that form carries meaning. It teaches us how to show respect, how to exercise restraint, how to inhabit our roles with dignity. Confucius believed that practicing li shapes who we are. It turns intention into habit and habit into virtue. Through repeated, thoughtful action, we become more attentive, more considerate, more human. The rituals themselves may be ancient, but their moral power lies in how they train the heart and mind. In families, li reinforces bonds between generations, reminding us of our obligations to those who came before and those who will come after. In society, it weaves individual actions into a broader pattern of civility and mutual regard. And in politics, li sets a standard for how power should be exercised, with decorum, humility, and respect for tradition. For Confucius, a well-ordered society isn't built by force or by law alone. It's cultivated through the quiet discipline of ritual. Li helps turn ethics into lived experience, anchoring abstract values in the rhythms of daily life. In Confucian thought, the highest aspiration is to become a Junzi, the superior person. But this has nothing to do with social rank or wealth. The Junzi is not born into greatness. They grow into it through moral effort. What sets them apart is character, a commitment to truth, humility in action, and integrity in all things. The Junzi seeks understanding, not advantage. They speak with care, listen with patience, and act with responsibility. Their presence builds trust because their behavior aligns with their values. Confucius places this figure in direct contrast to the Xiaoren, the small person, who pursues selfish gain, flatters the powerful, and lacks the discipline to live by principle. But the Junzi isn't just a personal ideal, it's a political one. For Confucius, a good society depends on leaders who embody these virtues. The health of the state begins with the moral health of those who guide it. That's what makes Confucius so relevant today. In a world often marked by political cynicism, polarization, and performative leadership, his philosophy insists that ethical cultivation, not brute power or empty charisma, is the true foundation of just governance. When leaders act with sincerity and citizens take responsibility for their own virtue, the possibility of a more harmonious society becomes real. Moral leadership still matters, not as a utopian hope, but as a necessary condition for trust, justice, and lasting peace.